conversation about the importance of information, real-time information for influencing people's behavior, and the importance of having real-life examples for people to understand and see what change means. But one of the things that, having worked in policy staffs at state legislative level and in the United States Congress, and now for a major national environmental advocacy organization, I've concluded is that both people and businesses are fairly rational economic actors. And there are many problems that everybody has great belief are wrong, and things that we need to do, and yet we don't do them. And I would at least posit that one of the major reasons that that is so is that frequently the policies that drive our economy and drive individual action quite irrationally encourage both businesses and individuals to do things that make absolutely no sense at all. And I would at least argue that the reasons for that are certainly many, and I'm only going to talk today about a few of them and what we, at least in terms of an environmental organization, are trying to do, and some of the things I've observed over the years in trying to do so. For one thing, we frequently don't define a problem correctly. Let's just take, for one example, we've got certainly a problem that most people believe we are too dependent on insecure sources of oil. I think most people believe that we are spending a lot of defense dollars protecting oil supplies, and that we are very wasteful in the ways in which we use oil. We also, at least if the polls are accurate, we have successfully convinced most of the people in the United States, and certainly people in all the other countries already believed it, that our use of carbon fossil fuels has created a hell of a mess for us in terms of climate change. And it is kind of a no-brainer that there ought to be ways that we can look to solve our dependence on fossil fuels, and a whole variety of ways of doing it. But Congress, in its own inimitable wisdom, decided that the way that they were going to deal with it was to mandate that we use ever-increasing supplies of corn to make biofuels, and that we were going to subsidize to the tune of effectively about $1.50 a gallon the use of corn ethanol in order to try and reduce our insecure nature, our insecure supply of dependence on foreign oils. The problem they were defining was energy security. But the unintended consequences of that policy has been to drive hundreds of thousands of acres of land out of conservation and into corn production. It has caused enormous problems for developing countries in terms of what we're doing with our corn resources. And it isn't saving anything much in the way of energy. So at least I'd start with the fact that frequently we are, as policies, we are looking very narrowly at the problems that we're trying to solve, and we're creating tremendous economic incentives for the development of a corn ethanol industry at the expense of the development of other new technologies, when in fact, if we were trying to solve a problem by saying, how do we become less dependent on fossil fuels, we'd probably find a lot more efficient answers, and we'd stimulate innovation in order to do so. And let me just at least offer one example in that area. We could ban cars. That's certainly one thing we could do. It's not very likely that it's going to happen, but it would certainly solve a problem of our use of oil. We could create more efficient cars, which is something that Congress has just decided that it's going to try to do. We could create a requirement for low-carbon fuels and stimulate a race for a whole variety of solutions that would stimulate innovation and investment in lower carbon fuels. We could decide that we're going to cap emissions across the board and let businesses figure out whether or not they're going to invest in efficiency, or they're going to invest in the technologies and green buildings that are going on in Boston, and create a financial flow towards those new technologies so that we don't have to simply rely on students seeing that they're being wasteful, but we could create a real financial incentive for them to be more frugal in their use of energy. We could create an incentive for utilities to invest more aggressively in efficiency as a solution because they get a real financial reward for it. So I think that whether it's in energy or whether it's in foreign policy or whether it's in a whole host of things, it seems to me that there is a huge role for trying to make sure that we get the framework right so that the economic drivers are driving people to do rational things that are good for the economy and stimulate innovation and put the private sector resources that we need, since government is never going to put the dollars that we need into developing the clean technologies that we have to have. We need the private sector investment, but the only way that's going to happen is if there is a real financial reward for investment in cleaner technologies. And the policies that we have right now are totally inadequate for those solutions. So as somebody who wants to see progress made at many universities and in cities across the country, and who believes that leadership certainly does matter, whether it's the leadership of companies like FedEx deciding that they're going to develop a new cleaner truck and create a marketplace when one doesn't exist. But from my perspective, those things are not going to happen on the scale that we need unless we get rational public policies that will guide investments in intelligent ways. So just in wrapping up, I want to, at least from my perspective, offer some thoughts about what rational public policy does. It creates incentives for innovation. It doesn't have government picking winners and losers in technology. It measures results and creates performance standards rather than deciding what technology or what widget somebody has to install, irrespective of whether or not that widget actually works or whether or not increased activity winds up creating as much problem as before you started. And it involves truth testing policies in ways like what's going on in Boston, because systemic changes don't happen because somebody at Environmental Defense or any other nonprofit or any other academic institution comes up with a brilliant idea that's never been done before. So that the kinds of whether it's local initiatives in Boston or private companies deciding that they're going to tackle a problem like McDonald's did with deciding that they were going to end the use of antibiotics in the poultry that they were going to buy and created a market for a far better product, or whether it is educational efforts such as the one that started here in Oberlin and has spread other places. Those kinds of things matter to policymakers who are risk averse and who don't frequently have the leadership that the mayor of Boston has demonstrated, and who are worried about their next reelection. So the combination, at least from my standpoint, of policies that stimulate innovation and that are extremely transparent, where the results are measured and accounted for, where innovation is rewarded and not specific technologies, and in combination with truth testing that to make sure that our brilliant policy suggestions actually work in the real world, are all critical pieces of whether or not we're going to get the systemic changes we need to solve the huge problems that we are facing as a country and as a globe. So let me stop there and